Hi there, welcome to the Writing Workshop Support for Bless Me Ultima, Chapter 1 by Rodolfo Anaya. The first thing you want to do before creating a constructed response type of writing is read the prompt first. In this case it says, how does Antonio's internal conflict shape the theme of the story in Bless Me Ultima, Chapter 1? So when you're looking at the prompt, you want to unpack it and think about what it is that you need to look for as you're reading so that you can read with focus. The first thing the prompt asks you to do is to think about the conflict in the story. So it's an internal conflict. We need to identify what the internal conflict is that the character is having. And then we need to figure out the theme or the message that the author is trying to convey to the readers, and ultimately explain how the internal conflict is going to help us to understand this theme or the author's message. We're going to use the RACE strategy to help us construct our constructed response. We want to restate the question or prompt in a way that will lead into our answer. Make sure that we answer the question or the prompt. Then we want to cite evidence, at least 2 or 3 quotes from the text, and explain how each of those pieces of text supports our answer. So again, looking at the prompt, it asks us, how does Antonio's internal conflict shape the theme of the story in Bless Me Ultima Chapter 1? So to restate the question or the prompt, we might write something like, Antonio's internal conflict shapes the theme of the story because, and then as we're reading through the story, we can look for an answer to that. Now, we've already read the story, so we're going to just make sure we understand the prompt again and what it is we need to look for, and then I will look at a couple of key passages with you to help start building our response, and then it will be up to you to find another piece of evidence and explain how that supports the answer that we come up with in this video. So again, we're looking for the conflict as we're reading, and we're looking for the theme. Ideally, we'll be able to see how the conflict shapes the theme or goes hand in hand with the theme and really gives us the message that we're looking for, and that ultimately is going to give us our meaning. So if you haven't read the chapter, then you definitely want to pause the video and do that. And then after you have taken time to read the entire chapter, you'll want to go through and find some key passages that are going to, first of all, show you the conflict so that you understand the internal conflict. And then you want to make sure that you understand what the theme is or what the message is that the author wants to convey. So we're going to take a look at just a couple of key passages. There are many throughout the chapter. Of course, that's how we get the message, because we get repeated symbols or we get some key ideas and main ideas that just kind of shine through and jump out at us. So we're looking first for the conflict, and I chose this simple paragraph here to help us think about the internal conflict that the character is going through. It says that it was warm in the attic, and as I lay quietly listening to the sounds of the house, falling asleep and repeating a Hail Mary over and over in my thoughts, I drifted into the time of dreams. Once I had told my mother about my dreams, and she said they were visions from God, and she was happy because her own dream was that I should grow up and become a priest. After that, I did not tell her about my dreams, and they remained in me forever and ever. So we know, since we've read the entire chapter, that Antonio has a pretty strong family bond. He is very loving and compassionate and cares a lot about his mother and her happiness. He works very hard in the garden, cultivating the land, to the point where his fingers will bleed just because she wants a garden, even though it's not great farming conditions where they live. So for him to resist telling her about things that could make her happy really says a lot about the conflict or the trouble or the problem that his character is facing, and it really is internal because he decides to keep the dreams within himself and not to share them or express them or let them out anymore. And it makes the reader wonder why. Why would he not want these dreams to be shared? Why does he not want to tell his mother something that would make her happy? And we know from reading that his mother's side of the family, the Lunas, want him to be a farmer, and ultimately they're hoping that he becomes a priest and brings a lot of honor to the family, and that differs from what his father's family expects. And so we get sort of this cultural division between the two sides of his family. And then we see the struggle that Antonio has with who he is to become and his identity. And that's really tightly linked to culture and the expectations that society has for him or that his family has for him. And he's really uncertain about that. So the next thing we want to think about then is the theme. And I chose two different ideas from the story. This is from the dream sequence when Antonio is watching his birth, where Ultima is the midwife there, and curses and threats filled the air, pistols were drawn, and the opposing sides made ready for battle, but the clash was stopped by the old woman who delivered the baby. So this is the point where the family is arguing over the baby's fate and who he will grow up to become. And Ultima stops the argument and says, "Cease," she cried, and the men were quiet. "I pulled this baby into the light of life, so I will bury the afterbirth and the cord that once linked him to eternity. Only I will know his destiny." So we kind of get the idea where we have this physical battle between the family, the Lunas and the Mores, the Vaqueros, and there's an argument over the destiny of the baby and who he will come, as though the culture of each side of the family is going to determine the baby's identity ultimately. And Ultima sort of steps in and says, no, that's not what's going to make the decision. It's going to be me. And she's sort of something that comes between the cultural expectations of the family. Later, when Antonio finally meets Ultima in the chapter, he says that I saw in her eyes my dream. I saw the old woman who had delivered me from my mother's womb. I knew she held the secret of my destiny. So he doesn't see his family's expectations or the social context that he lives in as determining who he is and his identity and where he's going to go and become, what his fate is. He doesn't see that from the cultural standpoint. He sort of sees Ultima as an external holder of his destiny, or of the knowledge of his destiny in any way. So when we look back at the prompt that asks us to think about Antonio's internal conflict and how that shapes the theme or the message of the story in the chapter, we already have our answer started with Antonio's internal conflict shapes the theme of the story because, and at this point, just by looking at a couple key passages and thinking about how the ideas are repeated throughout the chapter that you've read, you can see that it's showing uncertainty about cultural expectations defining destiny. And that's really a simplified way of saying that Antonio is uncertain about his future and where he's going to go, but he doesn't find the answer within cultural expectations. He's sort of battling them, and you see that in the one passage that we looked at where he decides to keep his dreams private from his mom. So looking back at that very first key passage that we had talked about when we were looking for the conflict, we're looking for text support, and we don't want to put a whole paragraph into our writing. We just need a really powerful quote that's going to support our answer. And if we're talking about uncertainty when it comes to cultural expectations, looking at Antonio's resolve to keep dreams private from his mother and to keep his doubt sort of hidden from her expectations is really seen in this quote, "After that, I did not tell her about my dreams," where he decides that he's going to keep that private until he's decided where he's going to go or what his destiny will be. So fitting that into our format for our constructive response here, we see that we have our answer, and now we want to move into some citation from the story, and we're very simply going to set that up with an example that supports my answer is Antonio's statement that after that I did not tell her about my dreams when his mother reacts joyfully to his dream. So we're just pulling a quote right out of the text that we're going to use to support this idea of uncertainty and questioning fate and destiny and how that ties into culture. Probably one of the most important pieces of writing for this type of format is the explanation, where you're linking the citation to your answer for the reader. So never assume that your reader is going to make that connection. It's really up to you to explain that. So looking again at our citation at our answer, we discover that the example that I've chosen in this video supports my answer because it shows that even though Antonio is a loving kid who wants his mother to be happy, he is uncertain of his fate as a priest, as anticipated by the Lunas and his family. And we see that reflected in this particular citation. And if we go back and look at some of the other key passages throughout the story, we can get even more support that backs up this explanation here. So it's your turn now to go on and find at least one more quote to use as evidence and explain how it supports our answer that Antonio's internal conflict shapes the theme of the story because it shows uncertainty about cultural expectations defining destiny. Now, the quote that I've chosen in the video is already showing the uncertainty that Antonio has about his future and about his destiny, and it already sort of shows him questioning those cultural expectations when he decides to keep his dream private. So to go on and support your answer more strongly, you want to start looking then at theme more closely. So I would recommend finding an example that links to the author's message about this uncertainty and about not allowing cultural expectations to defy Antonio and how that is reflected in the text. Don't forget to format your response. I did sort of organize it into the graphic organizer for you just so you could see how to build a strong outline or a basis for the constructed response, but you're going to want to put it in paragraph format, and you can very simply use the sentence starters that I have here and kind of fill in the blanks in the constructed response format. Antonio's internal conflict shapes the theme of the story because it shows uncertainty about cultural expectations defining destiny, and that's the answer we came up with, the R and the A of the graphic organizer. Moving into the citation, an example that supports my answer is Antonio's statement that, after that I did not tell her about my dreams, when his mother reacts joyfully to his dream. We have our citation there, and we want to transition into the explanation that this example supports my answer because it shows that even though Antonio is a loving kid who wants his mother to be happy, he is uncertain of his fate as a priest as anticipated by the Lunas and his family. Your job then is to go on and find another example that supports the answer, and you want to make sure that you insert your quote. You can copy and paste that right out of the text, put quotation marks around it to show that it's a direct quote, and then transition into your explanation. This example also supports my answer because, and explain how your quote shows that people should question cultural expectations based on Antonio's struggle with identity in the story. And of course you don't want that set of quotation marks right here. A little bit of a typo on my part. But your explanation will go ahead and link the quote back to the answer that we've decided. And there are many ways that you could word this particular answer when we're talking about theme. When we're looking at the internal conflict, of course the conflict will be the same. We do see some struggle with cultural identity in Antonio, even as early as 6 years old, but the theme itself as to how we take that struggle and how we understand it in terms of what the author's trying to convey. There are different ways you could word that. So this is just one way to start formatting this response. If you have any questions, just ask.